jump in?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we'll call the meeting to order at 10:01. Can we get a roll call?
Bunnell,
Here.
Dotson, Dorfman,
Here.
Kim,
Here.
Murray, Novak,
Here.
and Shepherd. For CCS, we have Rebecca Malinowski, Deborah Wishmeyer, and Beth Stoneburner.
Thank you, Beth. Are there any additions to the agenda? No. Okay. Seeing no additions, we will move to public comment. Are there any members of the public in the meeting that would like to comment?
I did just get a text, if I could share it. Sarah said she will join the call ASAP. She is about 2 minutes away from where she will be calling in from.
Okay, sounds good. Do we want to hold off? Do we want to wait until we jump in? If it's 2 minutes?
I mean, I think we can approve the minutes and hopefully she'll
Perfect, yes.
she'll swoop
Okay.
in.
All right, let's do that. All right. I don't have approved the minutes on, do I have it on the agenda here? It just goes public comment. Oh, and then review the selected bylaws. So,
It's on the corrected agenda.
oh, the
Or it should
corrected
be.
agenda. I'm sorry. Must have missed that one.
Yeah, that was it. There was a wrong date and we forgot the minutes, but
Okay.
so we
Okay,
did have
I
the
didn't-
correct
I didn't-
agenda posted.
My bad. I didn't print that one out. I'm assuming it's
That's-
is it number 5 then?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
I'll move to approve the limits.
Okay. Any discussion, any additions or corrections to the minutes? I didn't have any. Okay,
I'll second Joe's motion to approve the minutes.
thanks, Andy. All right, I think we'll need a roll call.
Bunnell,
Yes.
Dorfman,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
Novak.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, minutes approved. I think we should,
Yes.
wait with Sarah, though, for the, before we jump
Okay.
in. That's okay?
Yeah, and Andy, just picking up on what you said about Glencoe, going to bring that up for vote or because Des Plaines just approved an ordinance that it pretty much looks like everyone else is like, you have to tell us before you come and,
Right.
and
right.
there's a penalty for the bus companies and all that stuff. But
Right.
our mayor, where we left it off, and I haven't heard a lot because I sense there's a lot of disagreement within the community. So
Yeah.
know-
Well, for you guys, I mean, for us, it's similar, but I think the ordinance that they're proposing to our village trustees is written in a way where it says the village absolutely needs to be aware of bus schedules. And they kind of left it nebulous and kind of vague in the ordinance at this point. I think what we're planning on discussing in early February is if the village has knowledge of a bus coming, what are we doing? What will be the action plan for the village? How will the park district and the library support that if we can? It's basically, I don't know if I wouldn't define it as proactive. It's still a reactionary plan to what's been going on throughout the country, but we really haven't surveyed the community as to what their thoughts are about this. Again, I mean, I joke about it all the time. Glencoe's a small, sleepy town, but they're in a lot of ways they're opinionated, but they're very polite about their opinions. They don't often express it in public forums. So it'll be interesting because I get the sense that the village is privy to a lot more feedback from the community than the library or the park district are. So, but I am, as Lindsay was kind of indicating, I am very happy that the village decided that we needed to be part of the conversation since we're the the public building in the area. You know, people come here to hang out and stuff like that. So I think they understood that there would be some sort of impact on our operations if a migrant bus did come land in Glencoe.
Do they know, like, and I probably should read up more, who's like sending the bus to Glencoe? Is it somebody like in the state of Florida or the state of Texas saying,
No.
like, I'm just gonna pick this community in Chicago, outside of Chicago, and send it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I never pretend to know what's going on in either of those states. The way we understand it is it's kind of like throwing darts at a dartboard and saying they're going here, and then the bus trucks them all the way up without any sort of announcement. But I'm not really sure what entity or person is making these decisions.
And then once the bus comes here, aren't they sending folks to the city, and doesn't the city have sort of holding? Yeah,
Yeah,
That's
I
what
mean,
most people are doing.
right,
Yeah.
right. Chicago's having probably one of the larger I mean, they got a lot of weight to carry with this situation, but it seems like a lot of buses are actually moving away, and I think the way they're thinking is that they would cause less of a upheaval. They would cause less upheaval if they dropped off the migrants in smaller towns or periphery towns around a large metropolis like Chicago. So, but I mean, again, this is in a lot of ways, this is really, we have not heard anything. We just want to prep for this.
yeah,
We
smart.
want to see
So
where
smart.
we're going. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see.
Well, they said, Chicago Mayor Johnson invited all the suburban mayors to have a meeting about this. And I know our mayor, it's intended to go. I didn't hear any of the results of that meeting, or it seems to be less than fully transparent. I know some of the mayors, like Elk Grove that mayor said, I'm not going.
Mm.
But I read in the paper this week too, Mayor Johnson said to Governor Pritzker, this has to be more than Chicago. So I suspect what's being discussed, at least, is like the suburbs have to pick up some
Yeah,
of these
a
people.
regional,
That's
maybe a
what,
regional approach.
right, that's what I suspect is, I suspect that's what's going on now. So
Yeah.
Sarah has joined us. I'll just put in a plug for the Village of Oak Park. The village has been working on like a cross-agency group because we have a pretty large community of migrants right now that have come from Chicago or been transferred. I'm not clear on all the details, but I know that Jacqueline at Oak Park Library has been involved in those discussions, and library staff are working with them. Oak Park has a Latinx outreach librarian as well. So, I mean, she's been like on site in the various shelters doing work. So,
That's
just
great.
a resource.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Rebecca. All right.
Sorry
Um,
to be late.
Yeah, no worries, Sarah. Thanks. We just wanted to hold off because these discussions are important. So wanted to make sure that, you were part of them from the beginning. So
Thanks.
we're just jumping in now to reviewing the selected areas of the bylaws. We've got 2 discussion points here. We'll start with authority around OCLC and Find More, Illinois. Rebecca sent us some information and has, really done great work and starting to unpack this for us. So Rebecca, can you walk us through the information that you sent us?
Sure. So I spent some time going through our bylaws, as I think some of you have done as well. And also going through neighboring consortia bylaws, looking to see what, if anything, addresses some of these questions. So there's a few questions, and I did send them ahead. So the first question is, is participation in Find More Illinois, regardless of like how it shakes out, does CCS have the authority to require the use of a non-ILS tool to its members? And I mean, our bylaws say that governing board decides the things, and it doesn't go into details on what the things are. So looking at precedent, we have OCLC, we have Comprise, we have Novelist Select. I believe before I started at CCS, there was some NCOA work that was system-wide, as opposed to our current opt-in procedure. So all of these tools, none of these tools are required for the function of the ILS. They all enhance service in some way, which seems very in keeping with the CCS mission to provide effective, high quality, and future focused library technology. So, I think, and governing board voted in favor, although this group is very interesting. This group was all no's or abstains. Lindsay and Sarah, Lindsay, you were a yes.
I think I was a yes.
Okay.
I was
I was
the
going
big no.
through and I was like, interesting group. So governing board as a whole did vote to say CCS should use Find More Illinois. So, I think in this case, they affirmed that there is the authority to require a use of a resource sharing tool that is not specific to the ILS. We had a question from Heidi, which is the second question in the document I sent. When a discussion or decision isn't directly tied to the governance of the ILS, how should we decide if it truly falls within the scope of the governing body? And Heidi very thoughtfully provided like a suggested procedure that kind of required a multi-vote situation. I would say we would point to our mission and vision, and governing board sets the mission and vision, and then governing board is voting on these individual topics. So I don't know that governing board, essentially, and Lindsay, correct me if I'm missing a thing, Heidi's suggestion was essentially first we vote to see if it's within the authority of CCS to decide, and then we vote on the thing.
Right.
And I think that is not something I would want to enshrine in policy or bylaws anywhere, but it's certainly always on the table if we want to handle something on a case-by-case issue like that. So that's kind of the first question is like, can CCS say everybody's going to do this thing together? So I want to pause here, if that's okay with you, Lindsay. Do we feel like that is clear or warrants more discussion, not about the administrative components or the pricing, like the contract or the pricing or how many people need to vote yes, but just the idea that like, can CCS say everybody's going to use this tool? Any tool, not. Yeah.
I think, if I may, I'm sorry, I have my hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that Find More Illinois, and I think I was a vocal no, so ignore that, but I do think in some ways that it's illustrative of the trouble we're going to get into here when we go outside the bounds of what we agreed CCS does for us, and because it's implicit and it's express agreement that we pay you to do certain things and you charge us money. And when we go outside what your mission is and what we asked you to do for us, it's trouble. So I think that's true in Find More Illinois. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to die on Find More Illinois Hill, but if a lawyer looked at that vote, I think that they would say we violated our bylaws. Because you're right, the bylaws say nothing, which is not a good idea. It should not be silent. It should say something. I'll go back to that. But the other thing is when you go back to the mission statement that squarely says you provide technology, Find More Illinois was not technology. So I think, I think there's an argument we voted outside the bylaws. But back to the bylaws are silent. I agree with the statement here that says, hey, look, folks, we can't be writing the bylaws so narrowly that we're going to have, every time you say, hey, there's some new software we want to use or some new technology that's going to make things better, a new gizmo, we'd have to change the bylaws, So I don't think we ever want to be that specific, like a specific product or a specific procedure. But I do think there should be a general statement in the bylaws about what's, what's in, so to speak. Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, you even mentioned this there. I was looking at this, like it said, the bylaws are silent on the degree of relation of any of these tools to the ILS, required for basic functionality, supports basic functionality, expands functionality. And I thought, like, where do they get that language from? But that's not written anywhere, right? Right?
No, that was just me trying to like categorize what is a degree of relation. So those were just like my words in my notes, nothing
Well,
formal.
what I'm suggesting is it's not a good idea to be silent. It's not a good idea to be so specific that we'd have to change the bylaws every month either. So, I mean, but I don't think we should throw out the baby with the bathwater. There should be some general statement of like, hey, this is what CCS does. You know what I'm saying? Or this is why we're here. Something general. It shouldn't just be nothing. I mean, what if some ridiculous thing came up like, and we're going to build a yoga studio, and people are like, yeah, half of us went, yeah, we like yoga. I mean, it's like, there's got to be some broad definition. It can be broad, but some general sentence that says, this is us.
So
You know,
Joe,
Rebecca, I'm sorry, Lindsay, Rebecca, this goes all the way back to when Richard was still at CCS. And I had brought this issue to the, to the governing board and actually to our committee a long time ago, that we needed to better, have better definitions in our bylaws. And we didn't really get to that place, and so now we're starting to see, that sort of manifest itself, with questions like the ones we have today. And, I would quibble with, I would quibble with Find More Illinois not being technology. I think technology can be defined in a lot of different ways, but I'm just quibbling with that a little bit. But at the end of the day, the bylaws do need to be more specific. And, my law degree is telling me kind of the same thing, that, we really do need to tighten that up just a little bit more, because otherwise we get into these issues of, well, that doesn't really fall within the purview of CCS, to impose this on us or whatever. And then we could lose members, or we could, have a violation of the law, really. I mean, somewhere down the line. I just think that it is important for us to do something at this point and to tighten things up.
Let me just ask, so more so than the mission, and I agree with tightening things up. I agree with Joe that it can't be too specific. We can't limit ourselves. But again, I'm thinking, when I look at the mission of CCS, in my opinion, I think that Find More Illinois falls squarely into it. And then I'm also thinking too, we have this precedent of OCLC, right? We're all members of OCLC. OCLC membership is required, right, to become a CCS member. And we're looking at Find More Illinois to eventually be a replacement for OCLC. So to me, there's like that solid connection and that solid precedent. It's not like Find More Illinois is, providing a yoga studio, right? It's connected. And to me, there's that precedent, and then it falls fully into our mission.
I agree with Lindsay. I think that there is, because Find More Illinois is so related to OCLC in what it's intended to do. I voted yes for it because of what it was and how it worked and what the technology was and what functionality it would provide. Not because I think that, we should just be able to add willy-nilly whatever we want. And I mean, I understand what you're saying with the yoga studio, Joe. I think it was an extreme example. I don't know that it was the best illustration, but I get your point with it. And I don't know that I would say yes to everything or anything if I didn't think that it's specifically related to the ILS and how we are providing access to information and resources for people, which is what our ILS is supposed to do anyway. That's why I think that in this case, Find More Illinois fit the bill for CCS going in as a whole. Whereas there would be other things that would be suggested, even honestly, novelist, seeing it on the list, that maybe I wouldn't have said yes to novelist because I feel like that is a peripheral way to access information. But because of what Find More Illinois is, that's why I felt comfortable saying yes to it.
If I just want to weigh in real quick, if I could just kind of swing the conversation back towards the middle a little bit, because I do agree with what everyone else is saying, that the policy should be tightened up, but I think that the kind of the North Star of that type of revision requires this committee or governing board to make sure that Rebecca and her team have enough flexibility to consider certain products or services, whether they're a long-term contract or whatnot. But I mean, just kind of for me, the underlying thing here that I want to make sure that we are focused on is providing the CCS team enough flexibility to consider these things and then present them to governing board, to the directors for approval or not. And I think we have that right now, so I wouldn't want to reduce that in any way by revising the policy, the bylaws. I think I was a no on Find More also. But I thought it was a very healthy discussion. I mean, it went back and forth a lot at the last governing board meeting, but I still felt it was a healthy discussion. I think everyone's that wanted to speak and share their opinions had that opportunity. The vote went one way, and after that, the decision was made, and I was a no, but I was like, okay, this is where we're going. Let's go. Let's put forth our best effort. But as this committee starts talking about what we need to do to update the policy, I just want to go on record that it's very important that we maintain the flexibility that is necessary for Rebecca and her team to operate.
If I could ask, Joe and Frank are both have law degrees, which I love.
Nice.
I'm not opposed to like putting some more guardrails in the bylaws. I want to be clear about that. I'm not like, I get to do whatever I want. Like, I want to make sure that we're a well-governed organization. When I was thinking about this over the week, and that's kind of what the language Joe pointed out required for basic functionality support space, like, I'm having a hard time envisioning what those guardrails would look like, because I think historically, like CCS governing board has said, we want you to focus on the ILS. But if we say we only want you to focus on the ILS and the bylaws, that I think is really limiting, and then brings up, is OCLC okay? Is novelist okay? Is like unique management is doing like data manipulation? Like, what is or isn't the ILS? And that was where I really struggled with language. So I'm interested in, what, and I didn't find any samples. I was hoping to bring examples, and I did not come across any yet that were, even really just like a little bit different than ours. So, I mean, I'd love to hear more, if it is okay with Lindsay, on what you would envision in terms of alterations. I hear what you're saying conceptually, like we want to make sure that we're staying true to like the point of CCS. But in terms of like language and practice, what does that look like?
Well, I guess that's the $1 million, quite the $64,000 question or whatever is what's the sentence? What I say, we need a sentence, a general sentence. But I think that it has to go back to, why is there CCS? What is it that we want you guys to do for us? And right now, the mission statement's about technology. And Find More Illinois, as explained to us, was explored because it could be an OCLC replacement, but then you guys reported it was not a replacement. So that to me was like, okay, it's peripheral now. And now to me, I look in other parts of the governing documentation, and what I get to is there's certain things we're offering and you guys can opt in and opt out. So when I'm saying this is, to me, I'm suggesting this language should be there. If it's not an essential part of the bargain, so to speak, we might, CCS might still offer it. We might still want you to offer it, but it's got to be an opt-in and opt-out situation, like unique management now, I think you brought up. So that's all, instead of a majority vote on something where people are going to be asked to pay for stuff that was not part of the agreement. So that, I mean, I think I'm getting complicated here, but if there were a broad statement of, either you're limited to technology, we employ you to run our ILS and related technologies, something like that, I think it would be better than nothing. And if the vote, even Heidi's talking about a tiered vote, so to speak, that it could be, hey, we want this product or we want this thing, but maybe not all of us do. And there's an opt-in and opt-out option to it.
Joe, can you tell us what you mean by technology? Because I don't know that I view that definition the same way that you do.
I don't do that, and I don't want to relitigate Find More Illinois either.
Sure. No. And I'm not intending that.
That's not my purpose. Like, hey, I'm taking another shot at it here. But I don't think library technology to me is not. I mean, Find Illinois was a library system totally outside our own that we didn't need to operate our consortium.
Sure.
It was completely outside of us and outside of the purpose of CCS. Now, once we said, okay, we want to find more Illinois and we all vote on it, then CCS is triggered because they have to provide the technology for the resource sharing, but it's the product itself, so to speak, that we voted on. That to me was, that has nothing to do with CCS and has nothing to do with our consortium. Again, it doesn't mean we can't say we want it or we want to be a part of it, but there should have been first this acknowledgement that it wasn't essential to us. It was not why we signed up for CCS or wanted to be part of the consortium. And then there could have been a vote if you want to opt in and pay for it. But, so Sarah, when you say, Joe, our definitions of technology differ, that's the problem. The other lawyer in the group nods. That's that you've got this extremely ambiguous term now that we're defining in different ways.
Joe, I
Sure.
want to go Frank. Frank, do you have any thoughts to share on Rebecca's original question as what that language could look like?
Well, in a sense, Joe stole my thunder because
Yeah.
I think you do have to, at some point, define technology or define areas of technology or something, some kind of language that, because technology by itself is it's just too big or nebulous or whatever. And, Sarah's disagreeing, not necessarily agreeing with Joe and so on, well, if you put 28 members together, no one's necessarily going to agree what is technology, so I think that we're going to have to tighten up that language as far as defining it. And I know that limits things a little bit, but that's sort of what you have to do. I don't think that you can continue to run with technology because there are arguments that can be made for a lot of different products. This is technology, but yeah, is that an essential function for CCS? And I agree with Andy too. I don't want to limit our CCS staff. I don't want them to feel handcuffed, because that's killer for them. That's not good for them at all. And I think that, we need to get at the issue of technology. So Joe, you stole my thunder, but that's essentially what we got to get to what does that mean in terms of what CCS does for us and what we maybe even do for each other, as libraries, member libraries. So that's my thought.
And Joe, I wasn't intending to put you on the spot. I think, I can agree with a lot of the things that you're saying. I just, I think, yes, figuring out what that definition of technology is, because as you said, Frank, when you put 28 people in a room and not everybody understands that word to mean the same thing, then it's going to be hard to figure out how to agree on things and how to categorize things if we're all categorizing things differently from the start.
I am
I don't
gonna,
feel on the spot. So Rebecca,
Okay.
you said, I looked at other consortia language, but I didn't find anything. I'm just wondering, what did you look at? I think that would be great to get get our hands on what SWAN does or what the other
Sure.
folks
Yeah,
do.
I mean, their bylaws are all on their website. So I went through the bylaws for Prairie Cat, Pinnacle, and Swan. I didn't look at RSA because they're kind of in the middle of reorganizing as they separate from Rails. So I just downloaded their public bylaws. I put some language in the chat that I'll read as well, so we have it for the record. It's from the IGA, and it says, the libraries which are signatories to this agreement will wish to cooperate jointly and mutually among themselves to provide library automation and library computer services. So that is in the IGA. And then the IGA essentially then refers to the bylaws. That idea of like technology that we've been talking about, I just want to be clear, is like in our mission. So just when we're thinking about like stuff we need to change or stuff we want to change, I just want to keep these various documents clear in our heads. So
Wow, Rebecca, what a fun day for you when you got to look at multiple bylaws.
I procrastinated on it for a while, Joe, but once I sat down to do it, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. But I mean, honestly, I think to some degree, copy and pasted from when these groups were formed, like they were very similar. Pinnacles were a lot briefer. Everything Pinnacle does is a lot briefer. But I just want to point out, so our IGA does say, library automation and library computer services, which is more specific than nothing, but I think also still vague because, and I'm not necessarily making this argument, but I could make an argument for just about anything under library automation and library computer services. I could say library automation means bringing in like a print service station to everybody's libraries. So it's not like, it excludes a yoga studio, but it doesn't, it's a great example because it is very clearly outside of our scope, right? So it very clearly defines our scope as being within the library universe, but is still vague enough that, again, I'm not making this argument, and I don't think that would be healthy for CCS for me to make the argument. Anything can be library automation and library computer services. Oh, we're all going to use the same payroll service. Like, that's a library computer. That's related to libraries and computers and automating things that happen in libraries. Again, I would not do that. I don't think that's in keeping with our mission. All of which is to say, I think we kind of need to look at all of these documents and statements holistically when we're saying, what are we going to define?
And so
again, not opposed to changing the definitions of things.
when we go back though to looking at everything holistically, what do we go to? What's number one? Number one is our mission and our vision. And I'm looking at our mission and our vision here, and especially our vision, which I love. So our vision is to be on the forefront of library technology and adapt to changing needs and environments, right? That's pretty lofty. And I think it's a great vision. And I think limiting our bylaws to what we can and what we can't do is really going to keep us from that vision. So if this is honestly our vision, I think that again, just going back to Find More Illinois, what the governing board and what CCS staff did was very much in line with that vision, right? It's a strategic decision to try to move toward a new option other than OCLC, right? So again, I think we look at that vision, we look at our mission, and then we go from there. We can't have our bylaws and our policies limit us to getting to that mission or that vision. It's just the way that I think. And I think that defining technology is going to be really hard in today's day and age, and it would be extremely limiting.
So I focused my bylaws research on other Illinois consortia because I think, as Frank mentioned, and I think Joe too, like Illinois law governs a lot of this on the back end. Like the fact that we're an intergovernmental agency is because that's how things work in Illinois. But I mean, it doesn't sound like we're generally in agreement. Like, I don't know, it seems like we still have some disparate opinions here that I don't have clear direction. I can expand my search to non-Illinois and or non-public groups. I do think that academic library consortia may have more meat in their bones, in their bylaws, because I mean, like, we're all these public entities that have come together all in one state, whereas some groups may be across state lines and have other things. So I can expand my search and we can leave things as they are now. And for this component, we still have other questions to discuss. And we can come back together with a broader base of research.
I will help you do that.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So, okay, and I think that's great, Rebecca. I just want to be on the record that anything that we put into the bylaws, I wouldn't want it to impede your ability and the governing board's ability to meet our mission and to work towards our vision.
I hear that and I appreciate it and I agree with that.
I think, Rebecca, you were saying guardrails. I think we're saying guardrails, not handcuffs.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to make a note. My next task is to expand base of research. And include multi-type. Well, I mean, I guess those other groups are multi-type, but include academic and non-Illinois. Yeah, and I mean, I also just want to give a hat tip and a nod to Andy's comment and the overall discussion at governing board at our last meeting. Like, if this was a really contentious issue and that there were people on really very Joe, I think you were very staunchly no, and I think there were other people that were very staunchly yes, and it was such a respectful and productive discussion that I think shows the health of CCS. And again, I'm very willing to make changes. The ability of CCS to work within, kind of nebulous boundaries to make case-by-case decisions. So again, I'm happy to do more research. I'm happy to further discuss this. And I'm really happy with how that meeting went, regardless of the outcome. I truly didn't know going into the meeting what was going to happen. And, to Andy's point, I think it tilted back and forth, throughout the discussion as well. Just overall, I was like, wow, what a good group of respectful, professional, informed people having this discussion, and it was awesome.
No tomatoes were thrown.
No tomatoes.
It was a tomato-free zone. No, I agree. I thought it was a very good discussion, even though I was on the losing end. So I mean, and again, like, Find More Illinois is gone. That's yesterday, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
talk about that. But if you want to look at any other resources or any other language, I'll help you do that. If you give me homework assignments or I'll work with you, I'd be happy to throw in.
Thanks, Joe. I will follow up with you.
I'm also trying to think here about the difference between Find More Illinois and OCLC and other products, right? That like, what is the difference between those resources or services and products like Comprise, Novelist Select, Unique Management? And so maybe again, it is a tiered thing. OCLC is required for membership, correct?
Yeah, this is also a weird thing. Yes. Brian brought up in the emails that he can't, he hasn't found the specific documentation that like OCLC itself is required. This is another case of a lot of documents cooking. So our database management policy, which is in our governing board policies document, used to very clearly say you have to use OCLC. And in like 2015, 2016, kind of right when I was hired in member services, my predecessor was revising that policy. And because of all the concerns about OCLC, which are not new, these like pricing things and whatever, and the expansion of libraries using services like Baker and Taylor for cataloging, the language specific to OCLC was removed, but it still says that members have to use the shared bibliographic utility, not a shared bibliographic utility, the shared bibliographic utility, which I think our attorneys are like, well, then which one is the shared bibliographic utility? And so I don't know when governing board voted that we're all going to use OCLC. Going through our documents when we were moving offices, like 40 years ago, maybe. It's not a thing that has been sort of repeatedly reaffirmed by governing board.
But if somebody wasn't part of OCLC, would we allow them in?
So Waukegan is joining OCLC. Waukegan is a great example. They have been using Sky River, and I was like, well, we're all OCLC members. And they're like, okay, we'll be OCLC members. And it wasn't contentious. So
What if they didn't want to though? What if that didn't happen? Would they be
I think we would have, if they were like, we don't want to do this, we would have taken it to governing board and had governing board kind of make a decision at that time. Functionally, there are a lot of reasons that we're all using OCLC.
Okay, so governing board could decide. So it's not
Well, I think governing board would need to clarify in policy, because I think it is a decision that was made a very long time ago that we've been operating under, that there's not clear documentation for. So if someone wanted to challenge it, I think they could, and governing board would look at it and say, yeah, we reaffirm this decision that was made, in the 70s or whatever. Again, those documents were very old. But I think governing board would just need to have another vote and say like, yeah, you got to use OCLC. And it would be part of the membership application.
The word policy again. All of us, I'm sure everybody here has, our organizations are really, really old. And I know our policy, I look at some of them like, was this written in 1930? So
Right.
who knows what happened before you came, Rebecca, in the Sherman years and, but somehow there's some sweet spot for us, if I can say it like that we update what we don't want anymore, that doesn't work for us. That might be one of them. And that we take on new things. And if we're stuck with old definition, or we're stuck with no definition where there should be some, that, and I hate to say it's almost this bigger project now. It's like, what are we even using anymore? What do we want? Are
Yeah,
we?
overall, our policies are in, there's certainly some areas that need to be cleaned up, and we'll talk about one of them shortly. But all of our policies were at least updated this century. After 2010, all of our policies were looked at. So Chris did a pretty thorough sweep of the policies, and then at some point in the past 8 years, when I was here as well, we updated several more policies, many in conjunction with the ILS migration, because there was like very ILS specific stuff in the policy. There was like Symphony, Cersei Dynex. So we had a lot of cleanup to do there. So overall, our policies are in decent shape. There are some that it's like, ooh, that's going to be a beast to tackle, and we've like tabled it a little bit. But overall, they're not relics to the same degree that like the IGA is, that it hasn't been touched in many years.
So I'm wondering though, if there's then tiers, right, of various technologies and products, and I would argue that we should probably say that CCS or that OCLC is a requirement for membership. That's not written anywhere, but let's say we did say that it was a requirement for membership. So any sort of technologies that would be a requirement for membership perhaps has that higher level of threshold with the vote. And I don't know if we really want to go here, but perhaps that would make folks feel better. And then the ones that are opt-in just require the majority vote.
So just to catch everyone up, I think Lindsay, you've moved on to the 2/3 question.
Yes.
So one of the questions around Find More was that all it required was a simple majority, as opposed to, and if it had required a 2/3 vote, it wouldn't have passed. And so I just want to take a minute to clarify, based on the CCS bylaws, which I think are regular Robert's rules stuff. But for a simple majority vote, it is a majority of the votes cast, and any abstentions are added to the majority. When we're looking at a 2/3 vote, it's a 2/3 affirmative vote of the total membership. So in our case, right now we have 31 members. We need 21 yeses, and any abstentions or non-votes, like we still need to get to that 21 threshold regardless of abstentions or non-votes. So they're not added to the yeses like they are in a majority vote. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I know that was a question during the Find More vote. So again, open to changing the bylaws. As the bylaws stand now, we do not require a 2/3 vote for anything other than the budget, new members, and a bylaws change, including a change of ILS system. So when we moved to Polaris, that was a simple majority vote. So I just want to put that into perspective as we're having this conversation. I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been a 2/3 vote. Well, it shouldn't have been based on our bylaws. I'm not saying that that wouldn't have been an opportunity to look at our bylaws, but if we're talking about what we would want to move to that 2/3 requirement, just the context.
Rebecca, if you look back at votes, like when you moved to Polaris, if it was 2/3, would it have passed?
I think so. I mean, yeah, it was not a particularly unbalanced vote count. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was pretty smooth. The only thing that, since in my knowledge, the only thing that has come close to not meeting a 2/3 threshold was the Indian Trails membership vote. I know, shocking, right? Andy's like, oh yeah, I remember that meeting. So that meeting took place in January at Northbrook during a snowstorm. So one is we had attendance issues and we had to we needed, I think, 17 yeses at the time based on our membership. And there were like 20 people at the meeting. And then Alex was the president at that time. He and I had kind of given Indian Trails this like lengthy leeway on paying their development fund fee. And there was just a lot of concern around that. So it's not that people didn't want them as a member, it's that they didn't like the terms of their membership. So anyway, it was a very close vote. It passed by one vote. Because of that like a simple majority, it would have been fine. But because of that 2/3 requirement and the attendance issues, due to the snowstorm, it was very close. Beth, can you think of any other votes, simple majority or 2/3, where things were?
No, I was just trying to pull up the July 2017 governing board.
Oh,
And there-
yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff there were a lot of things there. So Beth is referencing when we moved to Polaris in July 2017, we had a bunch of stuff come before governing board, like various ILS settings that we needed to decide on. And so
There
that
was
was
a
another meeting
spreadsheet.
that there was like a lot of discussion and some things passed and some things didn't. On the simple majority vote system. And, you know, we've been trucking along since we went live in 2018, and, you know, the things that passed and the things that didn't. So overall, again, I think the system works well, that governing board makes these determinations on a case by case basis. And I don't think that I would say like my goal is that everything I bring to governing board passes. My goal is that everything I bring to governing board is reviewed and discussed and a decision is made. And even with Findmore, it was like, well, we need to decide this as a group. Like, this is a big change. And I know we're not only talking about Findmore, but just in general. My goal is not to make sure everything passes. My goal is to make sure the board is informed and is able to make a clear decision. Which is to say, whether it's a 2/3 vote or a simple majority, I don't have strong preferences except for procedurally a 2/3 vote, especially as we grow, which it's not exponential growth, but it's growth, becomes challenging in the event of any attendance issues.
What are the thoughts on from the rest of the committee on 2/3 votes for certain products or certain decisions?
I mean, this is being brought up to the committee because, is it because of the Findmore, Illinois vote? I'm sorry, I keep going back to that, but or bringing that up, but is it because of the results of that, or are we looking at, are certain members of the governing board asking us to consider 2/3 votes for everything, or majority for everything, or just leaving things as it is?
No, Andy, I do. I think that this is the result. These questions have been brought up by members as a result of the decision to move to Findmore, Illinois. And I don't think anybody is like, you know, like Joe said, nobody's trying to overturn that vote. I think they just want to make sure that there are systems, or as Frank would say, guardrails in place should something like this happen again. And I think the thinking is that for certain products or certain decisions, maybe a 2/3 majority vote would be more appropriate. Does that help summarize? why we're
Yeah,
talking about this?
yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate that. Yeah, okay.
You know, I think we're using the wrong tool though, like, in Robert's rules and a lot of organizations, that 2/3 vote it's hard to get that. So you use that for your big stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't want to say, should we buy more rubber bands? 2/3 vote. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
you use that for your biggies. So you don't want to use it for something that the bylaws and your language, your governing language already covers. Like, here's a weird example. Rebecca, when Polaris was up for vote, it was an extreme change for CCS. It was a very expensive change. It was the biggie, it was the biggest one, but it's clearly technology too. So there was no issue. Do you know what I'm saying? Whether the regular vote could be taken because the language we operate under, which was now the silent bylaws, but the technology mission statement, it was clearly in there. So do you know what I'm saying? So that would have been a majority vote. So I don't really want to change the 2/3 votes. I want to keep it for the big stuff. But I'm saying we're using the wrong tool. I'm back to, square one again. What we should do is put in, Frank, guardrails in the bylaws. So, find more Illinois, win, lose, or draw should have been taken care of by language in the bylaws and not by going to a 2/3 vote.
So you don't think that would be big enough to, that's not a big enough
I
change?
think the yoga studios example, like
Right.
agreement by all, this is clearly outside our, our own guide rails. I think
Right.
that could be a 2/3. We want to buy something completely new and,
Do you
we've
think,
never done before.
but moving
that-
from OCLC would be just a majority vote then, in your opinion?
Yeah, because it's
Okay.
technology. It's
Okay.
clearly technology.
Sarah, any thoughts? Frank?
I had some, but then Joe talked and I was like, oh yeah, what Joe
Yeah.
said.
Can I stop
I know.
talking now? Will I have no friends after this meeting?
No,
Joe,
I think you're saying some really
you're very
smart
clear.
things.
Yeah,
I'm
for
saying
sure, 100%.
Rebecca has to like me. That's the only, she's forced to it. But
I'll tell you, Joe, to be honest, like, I don't know that we necessarily agree on everything, but when you are sharing things, I'm like, yep, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, she's a smart lady. So yeah, I appreciate the things that you're saying, even if I don't necessarily see them the same way. I think that you're bringing up some really good points, and I'm glad that you're contributing them to the conversation.
thank you for making me feel better.
Okay. So then this committee, though, Rebecca, what I'm hearing is that this committee thinks that, the current bylaws, where in regarding to the 2/3 vote, we're fine with where our current bylaws stand. We don't want to change that. Is that what I'm hearing from you folks? So we can move on to that, and Rebecca doesn't have to think about changing that language.
I think so. I think to Joe's point that, if the bylaws are clearer about what it is we're trying to do, then we shouldn't use the vote, majority or 2/3 as a tool for what we're supposed to do if the bylaws are clearer about what we're supposed to do.
All right.
So then the last question around this topic relates to kind of the administrative component of Find More and OCLC, which is another reason these are grouped together. Does should CCS have the authority to require members to sign agreements with third parties? So I'll use OCLC as an example. So just to remove Find More from the good old equation for a minute.
Rebecca, can we go back for a second? That the thing about the 2/3 vote also talks about electronic remote participation. Is that a thing, or did I read that into it? Like you're saying?
No, so I had just noted if we were going to require a 2/3 vote. So Swan does this. Swan, for any 2/3 vote that they have to do, they do an electronic vote. And so and they've been doing it for years. I think they voted on the budget like that when I worked there. So theoretically, technically, if we're bound by OMA, then those are not valid votes, but nobody has ever challenged, like, again, someone has to challenge Swan, so Swan has been doing it this way for years. Is it within the bounds of OMA? No. Are they covered by OMA? Maybe not. So we do not have any provision like that in our bylaws, and that is written into their bylaws that they do votes that way. Does that answer your question? So I'm
Yeah,
not
I
suggesting it
couldn't
unless
figure
we
out
were
if
gonna
you
make
were
everything be a
suggesting that
2/3 vote.
that we should change to, like, every time a 2/3 vote will be taken, if we should say, hey, electronic fine, good enough. If you wanted to change the voting, in the governing board rules, if you were advocating to change that, because now
I am not. I would only advocate for it if all of a sudden we were gonna need a 2/3 vote on a bunch of stuff. But for like budget, bylaws, new members, I think it's perfectly reasonable to keep as is.
okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know if that was at issue.
No, it was just if we made change A, then should we consider change B?
Okay, thanks, sorry.
No, it's fine. On the agreements, so CCS pays the OCLC bill. The OCLC bill comes to CCS and we pay IHLS for the OCLC bill. We bill libraries for OCLC, but all libraries get an OCLC agreement from the state and sign it. So, is that okay that CCS says everybody has to do this thing, which is use OCLC, and you have to sign an agreement with OCLC that you're doing this thing? So in contrast, like our novelist group purchase, where CCS pays EBSCO for Novelist, Novelist Select, Novelist K-8, and Library Aware, CCS signs the agreement, CCS pays the invoice, you're done. So this was a big concern that Brian had, and I think, Joe, you brought it up at the meeting as well. Like, CCS is going to say you have to sign this agreement, and what happens if the board doesn't want to sign the agreement? So again, the bylaws doesn't specifically say CCS can make you sign an agreement, and it doesn't specifically say CCS can't make you sign an agreement. I struggle with this because I think it is so specific. If we look at the examples where this is a case where CCS, we're doing something as a whole group, and the libraries all need to sign an individual agreement. They're with government organizations where maybe bureaucracy and procedures are different. Whereas every agreement, I cannot imagine like a private party vendor being like, no, I would really prefer to have 31 individual agreements to track and monitor and deal with. So I'm a little bit like, I don't know. I don't know the value of making any changes for these very specific edge cases. And again, not around the decision of like, can CCS require the use of this, but like if CCS requires the use of something because we decide that CCS can require the use of something, what happens if the individual members all need to sign agreements? And so Lindsay's suggestion was that if this is something we want to document, the IGA seems like the most reasonable place to document it as a possibility. Lindsay, did I capture that? I feel like that was a very long explanation.
No, I think you did, Rebecca. And then I keep going back to, though, in my thinking is the only time that CCS should have the authority to require members to sign agreements is when that service is required for membership. That's, I mean,
so I guess when you say required for membership, like novelist is something that we just provide.
Right, but we're not, but my library, and that's signed by CCS,
Right.
right?
I just like, let's say EBSCO came to me tomorrow and they're like, oh, actually, we've had a change and we need to like get our customer counts up for an IPO or something. I have no idea, right? Like, if EBSCO came to me tomorrow and said, just kidding, with your renewal, everyone needs to sign their own agreement, but like this is the pricing and everything goes through CCS. Is EBSCO required for membership? It's built into the budget and we pay it and everyone has it.
Well, here, if I can throw this, if, again, it is written that we have OCLC, and if you want to be, if you want into CCS, you have to use OLC, and that means you have to sign the IGA, so like that, so when people join CCS, they know all the rules. You know what I'm saying? That's one case. And that's an easier case. If you want to be in our club, these are our rules, The trouble part is, the problematic part is the new stuff. Hey, wait a minute. I didn't know we had again, my stupid, I didn't know we had to join yoga when I signed in for S. And now my board has to write the yoga IGA, like, what about, that's the problem situation. It's like, this wasn't the case when you came on board.
Right, but that it's gonna happen from time to time, right? If we're a responsive organization responding to the needs of our patrons and changing technology, that may happen from time to time.
I'm just looking in my email to make sure I get this exact language from Brian because I thought it was really good. Oh, okay. So Brian said, my concern was that it was clear to libraries that join CCS that it being required to sign an agreement is something that can happen so that the elected trustees are aware that it is one of the things they're agreeing to by joining CCS. Essentially, the elected board is delegating some of their authority to the CCS governing board. So if we were going to reflect this somewhere, I like the idea of in the IGA talking about delegating authority related to, and the IGA says library automation and library computer services, like delegating some authority, but again, what does that sound like? Some authority, limited authority. The authority varies on a case-by-case basis. Authority as determined by governing board. I like the idea of the trustees understand that this group is going to make some decisions.
And then is that going to have to be run by an attorney as well to see if they actually can delegate that? Can they?
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't do this sooner. I'm gonna Lyra has bylaws, right? Win has bylaws. Because these groups can I understand it's specific, it's these are insurance groups, right? But they're going to change providers whenever they want to change providers, right? They're going to change from Blue Cross Blue Shield to United Healthcare or whatever. And then all of the members are going to have to sign agreements with United Health.
Is that what I haven't been part of Lyra. I mean, I don't think they've changed providers since I've.
But no, and I hope they don't change providers.
Rebecca, I think you need a lawyer for this.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about delegating authority, you're talking about a very specific thing. I'm in Lyra, and the agreement with Lyra is you do your best for me. And, I don't sign things with, State Farm and blah, blah, but all they do that. They put that bundle together. So I don't have to sign anything with the particular carriers. I sign it with Lyra.
Yeah.
So,
but you sign the application. I mean, I sign all kinds of stuff for Lyra. They come
Right,
out and
but
they,
we sign for Lyra though, but we don't have to sign for all their, you know, contractors, all the work they do. So,
Like, didn't they change, oh, whatchamacallit, workers' comp carriers? It was Hartford, and before that it was somebody else, and before that it was somebody else. Did you guys have to sign individual agreements when they made those changes?
no, I just signed, I know for Limerick, is anybody in Limerick, the
Yes.
health insurance? They just did a major overhaul this year and we had to sign all new documentation. I think they did a 5-year review or something. And and the board had to sign that.
But that was
But
with.
that was with Limerick. So,
Right.
you know, I'm listening to the language going back and forth. If there are things that we require you to be part of in order to be part of CCS, so like with Polaris, with, you know, here, Find More, can CCS hold those contracts, and then anybody who joins CCS has a contract with CCS, understanding that CCS holds those contracts, right? So then if I sign with Polaris individually and I leave CCS, then I would still have some obligation to Polaris after I leave CCS. Whereas if I sign a contract with CCS or an IGA with CCS and say, whatever CCS is providing, I have, then if I was to leave CCS, then I would have to find my own
Right.
ILS. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense to me, Sarah.
So can we have CCS, like for Find More example, and I'm not trying to go back and make any changes on decisions or whatever, but for Find More, instead of every library signing an agreement with Find More, can we have CCS sign the agreement with Find More, and that as a contingency of your IGA, of your library's IGA with CCS, then you have to, you know, de facto be part of whatever CCS has signed.
yeah, so that's the issue, Sarah, is that we wanted to have, we CCS asked Rails, like, okay, we're like, can you send us the agreement that CCS will have to sign?
Mhm.
And they were like, no, everyone will sign an agreement. All the members will
Okay.
sign an agreement. And we were like, well, we're doing it as a group, so how about we sign the agreement?
Right.
And they were like, no, everyone signs their own agreement.
Okay.
So I mean, I have talked to Monica about this again.
Sure.
And they are going to be doing some revisions to the Find More program, including pricing structure, which would hopefully work in our favor in the future. And I think that looking at the contract will be in there as well. They're like, oh, it just didn't come up before. No one's ever asked us a question about this. So this is the only way we're set up to do it.
Got it.
So that
So
was
it's not
that's
that
kind of the
CCS
issue.
doesn't want to. It's just that sometimes the
I would
person
have
with whom
preferred
we would
it. I
hold
would
the
have preferred
contract.
to just have one
Got it.
agreement. Absolutely. And so that's why it's like this weird edge case of like most organizations would, I would assume, only want to deal with one agreement. And so
Right.
it's very specific right now to Find More in OCLC, because you get a $0 contract from OCLC in the mail from IHLS every year to say like, yeah, I'm going to do the group services. But like, there's not even a price on it. You're just saying like, yep, I'm doing group services.
But when we leave CCS, do we still have an obligation to OCLC? Because we're signing that individual contract.
But doesn't the contract reference that you're doing it through CCS? Does it have it? You know what I'm saying? Does it have
I mean,
any?
it definitely references that you're a group, because they have a different like cover letter for the group for like the CC for like a consortium library or a standalone library. I'd have to look at the exact language. I truly don't remember it. It is annual though, so it is something that has to be signed every year. So like if it's July 1, and it just like functionally, if you were leaving CCS, like the longest you'd have on your contract with OCLC is a year, during which time you got other stuff. Like, I don't know. You probably do still have some obligation to OCLC. I think that the CCS member termination policy would say that you would have to pay CCS for the remaining, any signed contract you have with CCS, like you'd be responsible for the, like, the rest of it. So I'd have to look at, again, the things, ask a lawyer, but
I do think Brian has a point here with Find More Illinois.
yeah,
And so maybe we just don't do that anymore. Maybe we just can't join something unless we can join it as a consortium.
yeah, and I definitely, like, that would be my preference. Like, I could have pushed harder to Rails earlier to like say we're not going to do it unless you do these independent contracts. But I was like, okay, whatever, that's annoying, we'll do independent contracts. And then we took the vote to governing board, and then these
Yeah.
additional concerns were raised. So yes, I think in general, like, we do it if we're voting on, if we decide we have the authority and we vote on it and we do something as a group, CCS should 100% manage the contract.
I like that going
Yeah.
forward.
Yep.
What would happen now? Let's say the Brian question. You take X back to your board and they're like, we're not signing it. So now you have to go back to CCS and said, I voted to do this, but I can't now. I have to be out. My board won't let me do it. Then what's the recourse? You get kicked out of CCS? The 2/3 vote. I mean, what happened? What does that look like when the board says no?
Yeah,
That's what-
I don't know. I mean, I think like so many things, it depends. Like in this case, it's an agreement with Rails, right? So I think CCS could handle it with Rails to be like, look, you guys set up the contracts this way. We did our best effort to get all these agreements signed and we weren't able to, but like our board voted on this with this discount. So if you take away this discount, like we're not doing it. Because this one board voted no, because you wouldn't give us a system-wide agreement. Like, I think we deal with that with Rails. And in terms of like what would happen in a different situation, I just don't think it'll come up in a different situation. Like because it's so weird. Why do they want 31 separate agreements? What a pain in the neck.
It could come up in a separate agreement. It could come up, someday. And that's why I think, and Rebecca, like, I don't fault you or anybody for not sort of seeing this
Sure.
issue come up, but it did because of this
Yeah.
decision, right? And again, I'm with Brian that I don't even, if we took this to an attorney, I don't even know if it would hold, right? If they would say, like, they would say, that CCS can require this, right? So how do we then, I guess, put this into our collective memory, right? To make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. And that's where I think something could go into the bylaws. I don't know what it would look like, but just to make sure that.
So I've been thinking about the language around this. And I think that I think in the IGA, it could, like, again, with an attorney, not me and my pencil, add in some language that's like, from time to time, the CCS governing board may vote to, add a system-wide tool governed either by a central CCS contract or by individual contracts between members and a third party.
And the board must agree to enter into those.
Yeah, something along those lines. Like, again, I think there's a lot of questions about what, if we're happy with the IGA language that says library technology and library computer services, like, because that's where it would fall under, right? Like, CCS provides these things. From time to time, CCS may enter into, like, the governing board, again, not me, CCS, but the governing board may determine that they're going to do this thing together as a group, and that may require contracts. with members that you'll have to get it signed.
Which I think is great if we're able to do that. Like if the attorney says, yep, CCS has that
Yeah.
authority, that's great. That's option one. Option two, if the attorney says no, CCS doesn't have the authority to do that, then I think option two becomes, we have to put somewhere in our bylaws that all of our contracts have to be held by CCS.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Is that,
My like thinking face is like, something I should have looked up before I came into this meeting. Like, does that go in bylaws or does it go in policy? Like, because if bylaw, like, are bylaws the kind of structure and governance, but then bylaws are also the
Bylaws are
board's-
how the members govern themselves, and the policies
Right.
are other stuff. So the
Okay.
bylaws are agreed on rules for ourselves.
so where do you think something like that would go? And do you guys agree that those would be the two options? For something,
It doesn't, I mean, assuming a review by a lawyer, so, a real lawyer, that, it doesn't bother me to say, again, like if you, one or the other, like if we agree to this stuff, you have to sign because you're in CCS and that's the rule. And that's a bylaw. If you're saying, if we vote on it and we get it, then you have to sign it, or, the other thing is, or CCS does not involve itself in projects where you need in these individual contracts. I mean, you could put that in policy, Rebecca, that to the extent possible, CCS will not involve itself. There could be situations where it's impossible, but that exercising due diligence or something, that's what you're looking for. So, these agreements that don't involve the individual sign-offs.
Yeah, and I think if it had been in policy, like if there had been something I could point to that's like, we don't do that, then Rails would have hustled to draft a new contract. And again, it wouldn't have gotten all the way to governing board in that structure. So I think that's really reasonable. So, I mean, theoretically, we could do both. Like, let's say we update the IGA that's like, from time, like, sometimes agreements will happen and like, whatever the board decides is what you're gonna do. And in policy, it says, any decision made by governing board will be supported by a system-wide CCS contract or a centrally held CCS contract or something with language that is drafted by an attorney and not a Rebecca.
mhm. That, to me, that sounds reasonable. And
Agreed.
Sarah?
I agree.
Okay, so I have direction on what to work on in that area. And then, okay. And yeah, I mean, I have already talked about it with Monica, like for the renewal, like, they still don't have all the signed agreements. What a pain in the neck for them to be chasing these around.
We'll just blame this all on Rails. Thanks,
Yeah.
Rails.
But I mean, I agree, Lindsay, it's a good opportunity and a good catalyst to review these documents and improve them and make sure we're up to speed.
I think it's good. All right, can we move on to item B, to membership? Do you have everything you need, Rebecca, for item A?
I believe that I do.
Okay.
So we've got another sort of conceptual, how do we want to handle things theoretically question, which is how do we want to ask incoming members to pay in to CCS outside of project costs and regular member fees? So we've been calling it our development fund investment. And so how do we want them to pay? A little bit of background is that here I reference a part of the CCS bylaws, Article 9, Section 1D, that was apparently edited out several years ago. And I never updated my quote letter and just kept rolling with it. So the bylaws were updated. The bylaws used to say that governing board would consider the spend of members over the past 5 years when developing the quote for the incoming libraries. The bylaws were edited to say the governing board will refer to the new member billing policy. I can't find a new member billing policy. So I think this was like COVID time. I think there was a lot of stuff happening and it just dropped off. And we have new member billing policies, but they don't address this component of an incoming fee that new members would pay into the development fund. At governing board at our last meeting, we talked about like how we've been calculating that and why that isn't necessarily working because of the rebates we've been doing. I have not, this seems like relatively unique to CCS in that we've been doing this at all. Within Illinois, in asking the other consortia directors, they haven't really required that of members. Swan didn't answer, but RSA and Prairie Cat haven't required it. RSA and Prairie Cat also have financial difficulties because their membership is very different than ours, and in general work with more cash-strapped libraries and like based on a long history involving the formation of all the consortia. Like it is what it is. Like their members in their service areas, etc., couldn't afford a downstroke, as some of our members have called it. Pinnacle is Pinnacle and has not added a new member since their formation. And they don't have anything written down on what they would do, although they're working on developing a policy. So within Illinois, we don't have other solid examples of here's what these different groups do. This is another area where I can keep researching, but I wanted to get in front of the committee first and say, like, one, how important is it to us that there is this buy-in up front? And two, it's been the way we've been calculating it, it was independent of the incoming library size. It was based on an average CCS library. So however many members we had divided by, like the total amount that we were looking at over past 5 years divided by the total number of members that put into it. So, like Morton Grove and Mount Prospect, two very different size libraries, like paid in under the same
formula.
Yes, thank you, Joe. So if we want to continue with the development fund investment, which in talking with executive committee, we do, how much, if any, should be based on the incoming library size? And then do we want to have a floor? So that was kind of the issue with Vernon is like, oh gosh, this is a really low number. What do we want a minimum to be? Is there a minimum? How do we want to work this?
I need to step away for like 10 seconds. I will be right back, just so you know.
So just hearing from the committee, do you feel that we need to continue to, have folks do this buy-in process? Do we need to continue this?
Well, I have a question. I mean, how do we use this money? Is it a rainy day fund? Is it truly like, just in case we get in trouble, it's nice to have this little buffer? Or what are we spending this money on? And I'm fully aware that we're getting rebates all the time, so, which are appreciated.
Yeah, so we have separately operations reserves. So we separately have per our fiscal accountability policy, we keep a balance in our operating fund that would be more for like a calamity in terms of like all of our members stopped paying and how are we going to wind down the system and whatever. The funds we're talking about here are the development fund dollars. So those are used for like special projects that we don't want to kind of operationalize into the big budget. So things that we've used it in the past are like all of the migration expenses for the big CCS migration were paid out of development. So members didn't see any additional billing there. The first year of the new ILS, since we were overlapping with Cersei Dynex, all of our office move, if CCS has to, so several years ago, we bought new furniture from the development fund and then paying the movers to move the new furniture into our new office. If CCS were to move forward with Vega, that would come out of the development fund, this like pilot project type stuff. So that is how the funds are spent for kind of one-off projects. And they're developed through the strategic plan process and built into the budget and brought to governing board through the budget.
Hey, Rebecca, has there ever been a situation with a potential new member where this requirement kind of kibosh the whole idea of them joining the consortium?
So I can't specifically point to the development fund investment, but I can say like CCS affordability has been a question. So when I was out on leave in 2021, Deborah fielded some questions from Pam Leffler around this area, and we did talk about it briefly upon my return and took it to budget and finance. There are small libraries that have inquired about CCS membership, and I almost always lead with like, here's our benefits and here's the cost, and then I don't hear from them again, and it's cost related. How much of that is the ongoing cost versus the one-time costs, I can't speak to.
Okay.
I will say that since becoming an LSAP through Rails and having the new member catalog grant to pay for their migration costs, like we hadn't added a new member in 11 years before we were able to get that grant from Rails, because those one-time startup costs are really high, and Rails essentially cuts that in half.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I asked you because I guess my question was, do we need the money? Do we use it well? Does it, is this stuff that we're really thankful we've got, that fund to use? I mean, because if it's just some sort of empty threshold, high threshold where libraries that we would want to join us or want to join are put off because it's too high, so I'm saying, is it a legitimate threshold? I guess that's what my question is. And
yeah,
it seemed to be.
I think it's a little of column A, a little of column B. So historically, I think, and we talked about this with executive committee a little bit. Historically, I think it made a lot more sense because we would have to save up for years to buy a new $100,000 Cersei Dynex server every, 7 years. But since we're in a cloud-based environment, our members are paying that cost on an ongoing basis, that kind of hardware cost. So we don't have those kind of huge expenditures on a regular basis the way that we used to, because technology has changed. We do a lot of we haven't been billing specifically to add to the development fund since maybe 2017 was the last time that we did specifically bill over our operation funds to transfer into development fund. Most of what's in there or what has accumulated has been largely because we've been under budget in personnel due to staff, like when Chris left, and various staff vacancies that have taken us a long time to fill. So we ended up under budget. So it wasn't specifically funds, at least for the past 5 years, they haven't been funds that we've been seeking out. It's been, well, we're under budget and everything under budget goes into the development fund. There has been previously, since 2016, because that's the extent of my history knowledge, we've talked about this fee because it was a big deal around Indian Trails time, again, because we gave them 2 years to pay it. The directors who made most of these comments, I don't think are at CCS libraries anymore, but there was this sort of strong concern that incoming members should have to financially buy in to CCS to account for like the historical spend of our existing members to build up that fund and or get new technology. So the idea was like, okay, CCS just paid for this huge migration, and now this is kind of an outdated example, but CCS just paid for this big migration with funds collected from our members over several years, and then a new member swoops in the year after, and they get to take advantage of all of this cool new stuff without having to like pay into all the costs associated with it. As for the threshold itself, it is, I would say, like relatively artificial. Like how much that is, I don't think that it's, I don't think it's clear cut to say like, yes, this is like a reasonable and like this is what you would have owed over the past.
It looks to me like the calculation that you use seems pretty straightforward to me. If that's what you're trying to do is make sure that, folks are contributing to those significant spends that have been made, in the recent past, right? I think the system that you had in place or that you have in place now seems to make sense to me personally. But I guess the question is Rebecca, are you saying, do we even need it anymore? Was that the original question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's one of the questions, right? It's we have been assigned this task from executive committee to look at how this is being calculated. The message from executive committee, and Beth, let me know if I'm misremembering, was essentially we should probably add a floor. We should add a minimum. So because this $2,500 amount from Vernon feels really low. And is that fair to the members that joined like Mount Prospect and Waukegan that are paying in $23,000? And like, it's 1 year different.
But I mean, if we had, significant spends early in and it was like 5 years back or 4 years back where that rolled off, right? Or I think that's just the name of the game. Personally, for me, it is. Like, here's our equation. Here's what we use. And sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. And, there could be 2 years down the road where we may consider an investments again from the development fund, or, we pay for things out of the development fund, and then the libraries that come in then are going to have to pay that higher fee. I guess that's how I look at it.
is there any bad feelings? Like, is there something, like for the good of the core, we shouldn't have these huge variations like that? I mean, just our Mount Prospect and Waukegan going to say, hey, what the heck, folks? I mean, any consideration like that?
I mean, I haven't heard. Mount Prospect and Waukegan were at the meeting when we talked about this. I mean, I didn't get comments from them after. Palatine, so our current president and chair, Jeannie, at Palatine has paid the highest development fee. And she was like, well, she does think there should be a floor, a minimum. She doesn't know what that should be. But she was like, I mean, yeah, it's not great. I wish I hadn't paid so much, but like I did. I'm not gonna like ask for it back. So that's the extent I've heard about it.
How much did Palatine pay? Ballpark?
39.
Okay.
And then if any library, like if a small, let's say Glencoe wanted to come in at the same time that Palatine came in, would they have paid 39 as well? Yeah. Maybe the size of the library needs to be taken into account in the equation. Or maybe it just needs to be a flat fee.
Yeah, but I think there's so much that goes into that. I'm not wishing to complicate this at all. Because I think the formula it's fair. And I think what Vernon and Ann and her team are getting, it's based on timing and luck, right? I mean, it's not for us to say, well, gee, that let's look at this formula again. Or maybe it is. But for me, it just seems like, well, okay, it's the timing of it. And yeah, it's unfortunate that Jeannie had to, and her library had to pay such a high fee to join, but it was based on all the factors at that time, and based on all the factors at this time, Vernon's getting a sweet deal, and
I agree. I agree.
I think that's fair. I think that is what it is, but when we're talking about a floor, or adopting a floor for new members or potential new members, that I kind of think that's a secondary conversation, right? I mean, I just kind of want to get things organized in my head as we move forward, but it just seems to me that that's a different conversation than this. I think Vernon, we should honor Vernon and say,
Oh yeah, no, Vernon will not change. Whatever we decide today will
Okay,
not affect
that's
Vernon, or
good.
whatever we talk about deciding. Vernon's quote is out there in the world with this
Okay.
number in it.
Okay, but I don't know, a floor, if that's where we're moving our conversation towards, then I don't know how I feel about that. I guess I need to hear more from this discussion.
I have a separate question, and sometimes I preface things to my management team. I have to say this out loud, and maybe when it leaves my mouth, I will not like the idea anyway. So I know each year when we calculate what we all have to pay into CCS, part of what's taken into account is our annual budget minus debt, right? So would it make sense, because then we're kind of looking at libraries, and would it make sense to look at what their annual budget is minus debt and have some percentage applied? So then we're taking into account the size of the library, the potential ability to pay this fee. They're still paying something, but it's equally proportionate per library, even though it's not going to be close to the same amount. But then we're not having, a small library hit in a year when it's $30,000 and a big library in a year when it's $5,000, when it might be more difficult for the smaller library to pay and be able to join.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really doable, because at the time we're generating the quote, we have that percentage already because we're estimating their membership fees.
Mm-hmm.
So we could, and I can run some numbers for our next meeting. Like we could say, like our membership fee is split, 75% of the fee is split equally, and 25% is based on that proportion you just talked about. So we could apply the same to this and do 75-25, or we could just apply, like Algonquin, I think you're about 4% of CCS stuff, whenever we're doing percent share stuff, we could apply that 4% entirely. And, you know, if we look at everything that was added, you know, so let's say this. Oh, I've already divided it. That's, oh, so if we looked at like a net of $409,000, we would apply, we could apply that 4% right to that, or we could do some division of like divided equally among members, X amount, and then 4% X amount. I'm not sure that was clear, but I can write it down on some spreadsheets for the next meeting, what some options might be if we want to look at that.
So you mean like a hybrid formula, where part of it would, just like our membership fees, part of it would be based on your budget, part of it would be based just on the fact that there's 30 member libraries now divided by 30.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah, so I mean, I can run the numbers kind of both ways for some simulations on what it would have looked like these various years for these various libraries. Personally, it's hard for me because I'm like, they're your tax dollars and you're the libraries paying into these things. I would be delighted if everything was based on library size. You know, but that's tough for our bigger libraries, and I don't want to penalize any. So I'll run the numbers kind of a little bit of a spectrum so you can see it, if that's something we want to talk about for the next meeting.
So would it look like, would it just include, and it sort of include the library side into this equation? So we would still be looking at 5 years back, but then also include library size, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my only concern about not setting a floor is if we look at, we've had a negative net amount in our development fund for the past 3 years. So by that, I mean, we've given back to our members more than we've added to the development fund for the past 3 years. And that's why Vernon's is so low. Even if we like break even on development for the next 2 years, you know, we don't do any rebates and we don't add anything in, what does that look like? You know, when it, like, another library is like, I want to join, and we're like, you know, we've been giving rebates for 5 years. Do they, I mean, obviously, like, we're not going to give them a rebate, but like, do they just not pay anything to the development fund? And are we okay with that?
Yeah, I would say the floor is 0. I mean, to me, if we're going to use this equation,
I'm comfortable with that. I want to make sure that I'm understanding what the direction is I'm getting from the committee.
to me, it's almost
Joe, you
like,
look less comfortable with it.
Well, I think I'm agnostic on this one, to be honest with you. I take Lindsay's point, but also, you know, I look at the low amount that Vernon will pay. I take your point too, like it's, there's, a domino effect here, you know, for the future. If it's really low, we have no floor and we don't have money, there's no downstroke for people, you know, and what is that going to look at? The only thing I feel like, if we had some minimum, it should be low. I mean, if Vernon's at 24, if you said it's $5,000, I don't think I'd mind that, you know, but I don't think it should be really, really high if we have evidence now that sometimes it's really, really low. I don't want to charge people unless there's reason, you know, we really need the money kind of thing.
I guess I'm thinking if we did have a minimum and it was lower, if it was higher than what they would actually pay in, then some of that money we might want to then be able to go back into offering discounts again when it's really high, right? I guess I'm looking at this as like interest rates when you're going to buy a house, right? Like, you know, somebody buys a house and the interest rate is at, you know, under 3%, that's amazing, but now they're at 8%, and it makes it harder. So I guess, I don't know, to me, the floor just seems like we're just charging people for something when we don't need to be charging them.
So
For
this is not an
So-
argument that I personally am making. I'm just bringing it up because it has been made in the past. So
So if-
let's say that, you know, an incoming library paid nothing or next to nothing into the development fund. And then at their first governing board meeting, there's a vote on the table for, let's say, Vega Discover. And we're going to spend $250,000 out of the development fund for a 3-year contract on Vega Discover. And they're the deciding vote on whether we spend that $250,000 that they have not put into, and then would get the product for the next 3 years at no cost. Are we okay with that? And that's been kind of like the philosophical question about this, like, buy-in. It's like, well, they have to pay something in because they can't just come in and spend our money. Again, I think it's a pretty specific scenario where there would be that big of an outlay. But I want to make sure that we're considering all of these components. And it's fine if we don't have an answer today, because I don't think we're going to make any votes today, but
You know, to Lindsay and Andy's point, like, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't, I mean, it's like sometimes inflation's high,
Right.
sometimes it's no. And this is a timing thing and this is a luck thing. And, we can't control that anyway. So,
And
just move forward. But even if we had some sort of floor, it wouldn't be a giant floor, the number wouldn't be really high. So in your Vega example, they would
Mhm.
never be, it's not like we're going to charge them $50,000 to get in, and you know what I mean? So there we'd be in the hole anyway.
And I'm thinking, to me, if you're doing a floor, that looks like it's forward thinking, where our equation now, we're looking at the past. So I don't know if you can do both, right?
yeah.
Maybe you can. I mean, maybe that's, I don't know.
It feels
Um,
weird, I was gonna say, it feels weird offering, we're giving essentially rebates to our members and then charging a fee, at the same time. That just feels weird. It's like, hey, we'll just take their money and divide it, among ourselves. Boy, this is great, And from that perspective, it just feels like, you go to join a union and they ask, how much money do you have in your pocket? What are the dues? Well, how much do you have in your pocket, kind of thing? It's just,
mhm.
I don't know. It just feels funky to me. And I don't know.
What would feel less funky, Frank?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, when times are, when you've got a lot of money and you're giving rebates, all I'm saying is, if we had a zero amount, I wouldn't give them a rebate. That doesn't make sense either. But I don't know that, if we set the floor at 5,000 or 8,000 or whatever it is, I mean, that's just arbitrary and capricious at that point. I mean, who set that floor and why?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't really have a solution. I was just kind of laughing because it's like, we get rebates and we're charging them at the same time. It's just kind of odd. That's all.
Andy, Sarah, any other thoughts on this one? No?
No.
Rebecca, it sounds to me like what the committee feels is that the equation that you have in place seems to be working well but the addition of calculating for library size might make it even more equitable. Is that what I'm hearing from committee? So Rebecca, do you want to draft a policy based on that for us to review?
Yeah, I will, yeah, I'll draft some language and I will leave some blanks, and we can look at some numbers for the next meeting. I see we're so close to the end of the time. It sounds like a floor is not on the table. This is not something we've discussed. Should there be a cap?
No floor, no cap.
No floor, no cap. All right.
But I have one question. And it's kind of, I know we're running out of time, but when we were doing long-range planning / strategic planning some years ago, I think maybe Alex asked the question to governing board, like, what is our goal in terms of size of the consortium? And I don't
Mhm.
remember us actually landing on a number. I think 35 was thrown out there, 50 was also a number. But Rebecca, can you remind me, is there one magic
There's
number?
not a number.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
can pull the write-up that I did for governing board, but essentially, I looked at all of the potential members in our existing service area and I
Mhm.
counted them up. And I think it was like 47, maybe, just looking at public libraries. And I was like, listen, I think there's no way in the world that all of these libraries are going to join without losing anyone else. I mean, like, luckily we haven't lost a member in a very long time, and I hope that trend continues. I like a growth and instead of a shrink. But looking at the number of libraries in the area, adding a cap to membership, we determined was not necessary. And there were a lot of procedural questions then about, like, is it first come first serve? Like, do we want to save a seat for like this really awesome library that we want to bring in?
Right.
So there is no cap to membership. There was a concern about, like, how big is too big for governing board?
Mhm.
And as part of that, we did our big governance retreat, and we shifted some of the responsibilities from governing board to executive committee, so governing board can really focus on strategy and membership and not on like ILS settings, to make our meetings manageable with a growing number of people around the table.
Thank you.
All right. So, Rebecca, I think hopefully you have what you need for everything. Right?
Yes.
You'll draft that stuff and come back to us. I want to thank you all. This was a really long meeting. We talked about some heady stuff here, I think, for the consortium. So I really appreciate your time and everybody's thoughts in this. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I so move.
I'll second.
Do we need a roll call for that one?
You can declare us adjourned.
Okay, I'll declare us adjourned. Okay, thank you all so much.
All right.
Appreciate you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great weekend.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. This was
Everybody
really
wants to
helpful.
get on the bylaws committee, by the way.